Please come up.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, with no further ado, I don't know what ado is, but we don't need any further ado. Morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Parker. I'm very grateful recovered alcoholic. Been sober since March 22nd of 1985, and I am truly grateful for that. My mother always likes for me to tell you that she's grateful too. She's It's interesting when some of my sponsees, somebody get to be around my mother, they always want to pump her for information, but she really saw a lot. But thank God she's lived to be 99, because, a year or two ago, I was like, are we getting close to being even? Because I've bought her Cadillacs and sprinkler systems and just everything. I'm like, I got a long way to go. That was... Jimmy said it when he said, it's funny, we do a lot of the conferences, and not so much in the last 2 years. It's been funny doing this one because it's been a couple of years. I wasn't really kidding when I got up here Friday and said, my stuff was tight in 2019. I don't know what's going to come out now, but one of the things that's always interesting is when you come to one of these things, you go, oh, Tom and Cheryl are going to be there this weekend. We'll get to visit, and stuff like that. And it's Friday night, and then it's Sunday, and the speakers are coming and going, that's that when you're the Sunday morning speaker, that's usually what you get to see from all the other speakers as they're up there going. But so many things that I'd like to talk about, and I look through some of my notes sometimes, and I'm like, God dang, I meant to, it's funny, I rarely get down from the microphone and regret something I said, sometimes, but it's always something I forgot to say. It's always where you go, oh, I meant to talk about that, or I meant to talk about that, and I've got just, these are highly organized notes here. I like to put up here, but God speak trust today. I got to be with us. We want to welcome you into this room. This is my last session, so I want to think about what Katie's going to close it out from here. The biggest difference, I think, I hope this self piece is landed on you, because that's the biggest message that we try. I sponsor this doctor, and he's like, "Believe me, I've got that." Because like I said, but he doesn't. He's got it less than anybody at the table, and I don't care if he hears this recording. But. It changes everything, and it's funny because we got a common friend that came up one time after Katie gives a blazing third step talk. There's a bunch of them online and stuff like that. But if you're used to the third step being, say a prayer to God, and then that talk lands on you. It's like, he came up one time, I was telling you, he goes, God, Katie's third step talk makes me feel bad, and we call it post self-awareness depression, but I had one guy he's like, and I said, well, wouldn't it be worse if you came to me with your inventory and I sat here and let's do it, and then went, oh, dang, man, I can't see anything you could do differently. You just got tough luck, buddy. It's we ought to be celebrating the big chunks of work we have that are available to do work on, because it's always moving upward. It's always getting better. There's more freedom, more available and stuff like that. But when you roll that into the inventory process, if I miss that self piece in the third step, and then you get to the fourth step, being convinced that self manifested in various ways is what it defeats. When you get to the end of the fourth step, it says, we hope you're convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. And then in the eighth step, I missed it there. In the eighth step, it says we attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live life on self-will, and run the show ourselves. I mean, it just seems to me like it's all over our process, and I don't hear everybody talking about it, And I mean, our boy Chris, one day he goes, what if 15 years from now, because, you look at things differently, then he goes, what if 15 years from now we're going, God, remember when we were into all that self stuff? I mean, we were way off, I mean, but I mean, I've been riding it for 20 years now, and my life is a lot better. Just to hit on a few things, at the end of that inventory process, and we do our fifth step. Katie hit it yesterday. That hour at the end, I used to call it the hour after the fifth step. Now I call it the hour at the end of the fifth step. It's a powerful chunk of work. I tell guys, don't schedule dinner after you do your fifth step with me, because you're not done till you go home and spend that hour in reflection. And it used to, I would just kind of go home and flip through the book a little bit or whatever, but now it's a serious piece of business. And when it says consider the first 5 steps in all their implications, so am I powerless over alcohol? Am I bodily and mentally different from my fellow? Do I have this physical allergy coupled with the mental obsession? Am I hopeless in the absence of an experience with a higher power? And then carrying that into the second step. And then when you get in the third step, am I convinced that my life run on self-will can hardly be a success? And am I, and have I seen this? Am I the actor trying to run the whole show? Do I suffer from this delusion that if only everybody would do right, my life would be fine, but I can't get everybody, and carrying that through that whole process. And then, is it common for me to, what usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well. I become angry, indignant, self-pity. And, the funny thing about those, they don't happen like angry this week, indignant next week. It's like boom, boom, boom. I can't believe, I'm angry. I can't believe they did this to me, indignant after everything I've done for them. This is the way they're going to treat me. And then self-pity is like, what's the use? I can't work with these assholes anyway. I mean, or insert a cleaner word than that. And then carrying that into the inventory process, and have I seen how self manifests in resentment and in fear being the failure of self-reliance? And, when I'm in fear, one thing I figured out, I'm such a big thinker, is that I can't experience the failure of self-reliance if I'm not in self-reliance, So when I'm feeling fear, it's like I'm at the limit of where self-reliance will take me. And it's a wonderful opportunity to have a power greater than myself that I can bring in there I've talked to that with the guys sometimes before. I go, wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of a power that we could turn this stuff over to, because when you're facing some of the stuff we were facing this winter, it was a great comfort to know that, there was a bigger picture than I had in mind, and God carried us through that process. And let me tell you, if you ever get sick, you want Katie as an advocate. I used to say it was unbelievable the way she showed up in the hospital and through that process, but it wasn't unbelievable at all. I mean, it was just Katie being Katie, and you would expect. I mean, she's going to show up like that because she's just amazing. I've never been happier than this relationship, and we'll get around to some of that talk in the amends process too. But one of the things that I think would surprise a lot of people when we talk about going through the steps really quickly, I think it would surprise a lot of guys to know that when they show up at my house with their fourth step in their hand, that day we're going to do the fifth step. They're going to go home and do the hour at the end of the fifth step. They're going to make an amends list, and we're going to start talking about amends. But that night, they're going to be in 9, 10, 11, and 12. I mean, it doesn't take a long. Now we're going to keep going through the work. I believe in working the steps on a continual basis, and it goes deeper and it goes deeper. Danny is such a West Texas poet. I mean, he was standing in my living room one time, and he goes, this brook can be shallow enough for a baby to bathe in, and deep enough for an elephant to swim in. And I go, where'd you hear that? And he goes, I just made it up. So So for a long time, whenever I'd be talking and Danny was in the audience, I'd always go, well, like I always say, this book can be shallow enough. But Danny, I tell you, there was Chad and Danny and I, and Chad's a real person. He's right here. Yeah, yeah. The best AA I've had, some of the best I've had with, especially involving Danny, has been in our living room, and getting up and one morning, Chad and Danny and I we talked for, I don't know, probably an hour and a half, and our only regret was that we didn't have a recorder on, the whole time. It was, I don't even remember what the topic was, do you? Yeah, AA, God, that kind of stuff, but the process. So anyway, but we do the inventory, and we it's funny. I had a sponsor call me one time on the way home from a fifth step. At the end, those fifth step promises says after we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye, that sort of thing. And his sponsor called me on the way home, and he goes, "I'm not delighted." And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I feel like we just spent the last 3 hours of you rubbing my face and how selfish and self-centered I am." And that's when we talked about that thing about isn't it good that we have some stuff we can work on? What if you'd have come here and not seen anything? And there was another chunk of that I was going to say. Oh, boom, pulled it back up. I always get so excited when I circle back around to one. But now I'm going to lose it. I got it. I got it. Like a Swiss watch, boy. I tell you. There's a thing in there where it says we avoid worry, remorse, and morbid self-reflection because the ego doesn't care whether I'm thinking I'm wonderful or I'm thinking I'm the biggest turd that ever walked the planet, as long as I'm thinking about me. They're like, we like the self-righteous, I got this thing, but if you will accept self-pity and morbid self-reflection, as long as you're thinking about you. We can do our best work with you as long as you're thinking about you. Anything that will keep your thoughts away from anything higher, we can work with, on the dark side. So, there's a chunk I like to talk about in 6 and 7. One time Katie was asked to give a talk at a state line, or not a, Woodstock type of format where they give you a step. And it's funny because Lee was involved in this. He asked Katie if she wanted to speak at the upcoming Woodstock, and that's kind of a big honor. It's a big conference. And so you think, yeah, wow, that'd be great. And he goes, we'd like for you to do 6 and 7. She's like, am I the only one that feels like you'd run out of bullets on 6 and 7 after about 4 minutes, and so she comes at Lorenz. Lorenz is one of my favorite 10-step buddies. He hits me like with that Don Prince stuff, and it's painful. But here's a perfect example. Katie goes out there and she goes, they want me to do 6 and 7, and she goes, so anyway, she goes back in there and Lee's sitting there and she goes, Lee, I'm really a lot better at step 3. And so she comes back out where Lorenz is sitting there in the lobby, and she goes, I talked him into giving me step 3. And he goes, oh, that's too bad. It would have been interesting to see where God took you with step 6 and 7. So now she's a producer of confusion rather than harmony. She has to march back in there and go, give me 6 and 7, So we got to spend, 9 months preparing for a 6 and 7 talk, and what would that look like, and how do you put a little meat on the bone? Because it's funny. That's one of those ones where they go, you got to have the 12 and 12 for 6 and 7 because it's only 2 little paragraphs. But we've spent 75 pages preparing for those 2 little paragraphs, and it's a powerful piece of work. But it boiled down to for me is that 6 and 7 are four things. We've got fresh stuff coming out of the inventory process. We've seen manifestations of self over and over and over and over, where you're like, there were times where you got to have a, fifth step, fourth step this thick, and you get this far into it and you go, if we go into the rest of these, are any of them going to be significantly different than the other ones? They're like, no, I get where we're going, and so what we come out of with 6, it says these things that we've admitted are objectionable. Are these things objectionable? And I used to say, are they objectionable to me? Like that was, in fact, one time in Tampa, I said, it's not really that big a deal if I'm violating Katie's sexual values. It's when I'm violating my own sexual values that I get in trouble. And I went, I'd like to retract that statement. Turns out it's really important that I don't violate Katie's sexual values either. Yeah. But, I used to say, is it objectionable to me? But sometimes if it's objectionable to her, it needs to be objectionable to me. I mean, there are times where she'll go, wouldn't the fact that this bothers your best friend be enough to have you take a look at it? It kills me when she goes, that's not how we talk to our best friend. And I'm like, oh, because you can't really put your dukes up over that one. I mean, yeah. You ever find yourself in an argument where you can stand outside yourself looking at it and you're like, I'm not really that committed to this argument, but I don't know how to back out of it, really. So, can we just stop? So these things that we've admitted in the fifth step, are they objectionable? Is the first piece. Is it objectionable? The second piece is, if it's objectionable, do I have the power to change it on my own? Is this something where I can just go, knock it off, Charlie? Or is it one of those things we keep talking about in the book, where we come up against something that's objectionable and I don't have the power to change it, And if it's objectionable and I don't have the power to change it on my own, the third piece is, am I willing to let God change it in whatever way He sees fit? I don't get to instruct the Creator on how I think this ought to go, And if those three things are in place, it's objectionable. I've proven I can't change it on my own, and I'm willing to let God change it and whatever. Then we take it to God in the seventh step, and it turns us into a really powerful, and this happens a lot in sobriety. My experience in 37 years of sobriety is I've never had to really sit and meditate deeply to find something to work on. Am I the only one? Where because you get the big chunks, and then there's a little blip on the horizon that could possibly be a problem, and then as it gets closer, you go, oh, this is definitely a problem, and then, oh, this is a big problem, and then boom, it's like right here, and that's when I take it into inventory, but so now I've admitted this stuff that's come out of my force, and wouldn't that logically roll you right into wanting to clean it up? If I'm seeing where I've been screwing this stuff up, it rolls me right into wanting to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of my effort to live life on self-will and run the show myself. That's right out of the book, and then you're like, wow, I didn't really see it that way for a long time, because I made those tornado amends where if a tornado roared its way through people's life, I kind of made the ones that were the first people that would have been touched by that tornado, and some of the ones I felt the worst about. But I was amazed before I was halfway through, and I had that amends list, and there's something about the amends list that makes its way into a drawer at some point. It's easy for that list to make its way into the drawer. So to talk briefly about the amends process. And the book has a tremendous amount of instruction and detail on how to make amends and when to make amends and that sort of thing. And we've been pouring over it in primary prayer. I want to really sincerely invite you guys to come to the Wednesday night primary purpose group meeting. The only thing that's unfortunate is we're at the tail end of the 11th step right now, which means we're about to burn into the lost chapters. I mean, when we started doing primary purpose group, my book was highlighted, underlined, thumb tabs, side notes, and stuff like that till you got to page 103. And then it was just lily white. I mean, from there on back, the chapters, we call them the lost chapters, but there's such good stuff in there. But that's what we're going to be rolling into here pretty soon. It takes us forever to go through the book, but it's amazing how impactful one paragraph, two paragraphs can be sometimes. And Chad and I have been, and Katie, and there's a whole crew of us have been doing, but really like to see you come. Well, one of the things that's interesting about the amends process is that the bulk of the advice in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is geared towards not having to make the amends. It sounds crazy, but I mean, if you have an amend you don't want to make, all you got to do is go over to the clubhouse and talk to two or three people, and somebody will tell you, you don't have to make that, and no, come on, and the lamest one is the one where they go, well, it says except when to do so when injure them or others, and you're part of others, so, it's, and there's a rule on that in the book. It says the rule is that we are hard on ourselves but easy on others. But Katie and I, God led us right to Mark Houston. He put the three of us together in a room for just like this for a weekend one time. And my favorite people to meet at a weekend like that is the guy that's here and he's going, I don't even really know why I'm here. And you're like, oh, that is wonderful. I mean, it could be the hand, because there's a thing on page 100 that says, when we look back, we see that the things that came to us when we placed ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have imagined or created. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. When we look back, we realize things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. I used to close talks with that, because I thought it sounded badass and spiritual, and I'd said it 50 or 100 times before I saw the chunk in there. That's why I love the set-aside prayer. Sometimes you're reading something that you think you know what it says, and it just goes, whoop. And it took me a long time to see the piece where it said, when we look back, we see that the things that came to us when we placed it, because am I the only one that thinks God's will is going to be a little bit of a jip? It's like, I don't see it as freedom and abundance. It's like, but when we look back, we see that when we placed ourselves in God's hand, it was better than anything we could have planned. The results of this kind of stuff and commitment. So we were doing big book stuff, and this guy, Dick, in Austin says, I heard about a big book study in Dallas. And I said, I got people in Dallas. Let me look into it. And Rick Pullen, rest his soul, sends me a flyer. And it's a flyer for this big thing. And it says Mark H. and this other guy. I'm not going to say the other guy because he bugs the crap out of me. But I go to Katie, and of course I judge no man. But I go to Katie. I go, I don't think this is what Dick was looking for, but I think we might like this because we'd been listening to some Chris R. talks and some Myers R. talks and stuff like that. And I go, I think I like Chris, and I think Mark sponsors Chris. I bet we'd like Mark. That's about how much thought went into us driving 230 miles to be at this big book workshop. And oh my God, I mean, that weekend, I meditated more in that weekend than I had in my first 17 years of sobriety. And Mark, at one point, Mark was up there reading, and I leaned over to Katie and I go, what book is he reading from? And she goes, I think it's the big book, and we're like, what? I mean, because, he was coming with stuff where you're like, I've never heard that in my life, and I've been in AA for 17 years and thought I was a big book guy. My home group was a Tuesday night big book study where we would read the whole chapter and then talk about whatever we want. Sometimes the chairperson will go, well, that's our topic, or you can just talk about whatever you want. I mean, no, don't listen to that part. It's like, if we let us talk about whatever we want, we'll talk about whatever we want, but so Mark, we had this powerful experience. I mean, I had to take Monday off after that weekend. I was just jelly-headed and a lot of considerations. And so anyway, not too long after that, what was the God piece of it, when I talk about being led, I plugged in one. I was going to get a massage one time, and I asked the massage therapist one time, I go, you mind if I bring stuff to listen to? And he goes, you have no idea how sick of waterfall music I am, And so he's not AA, but he's like, plug it in, So you can't even imagine, But so I'm listening to this. One of the CDs from that weekend, and he starts it off by going, this ought to be interesting. Mark went silent for 3 years one time. He felt like he was starting to buy into his own press and he just decided to do his own work, and he didn't do any talks for 3 years. And I knew about that, but we plug in this CD that Katie and I had just gone to, and he says, this ought to be interesting, because I haven't done anything like this in about 3 years. And I mean, Danny recovers faster than I do from crying. I know I've always envied speakers that can cry and talk at the same time. I'm either crying or talking. You look back and you see, Katie and I were in trouble. Katie was in real trouble, and I was, coming out of a nasty patch. And after the plane crash, I didn't get to talk about the plane crash this weekend, but a lot of this stuff was going on, and I'd made some serious changes after that plane crash, because a lot of that stuff that I thought I'd do one day, now you're like, it was almost the end of the game, pal, and so I started changing, just like we ran up against this winter. Well, when you look at Charlie and Katie were in big trouble, and here's Mark Houston coming out of a 3-year silence, and God moves us all to Denton, Texas, for a weekend. And I look back at the experience that came out of that and the ripple effect of that experience, in our friends and sponsees and community and that sort of thing. It's emotional, so not too long after that, Mark says, I was sponsored by Myers at the time, and Mark says, I'm going to move to Austin. I'm going to move to Austin and set up a treatment center. And I'm like, what? And I'll never forget it. I was driving in my truck, and I said, are you going to take any sponsees when you come here? He says, I'm going to take 3. And I said, could I be one of them? By the 3rd day, thank that God these things don't go 4 days, or I'd be crying at Hallmark commercials, So Mark comes to Austin, and now my boys, I've been into work, and I got some sponsees now, and I've been, working with Myers, and we've done some stuff. But then, here comes Mark Houston, and I'll say it again, if you don't hear me say anything else, get a hold of some Mark Houston CDs and listen to them. I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and said, Mark Houston changed my life, and I never met him. I just listened to him on CDs, and you talk about direct, and there were times where he'd be talking at the table, and Chad would be looking at Mark, and he'd look at me, and he'd look at Mark, and he's looking at me like, are you are you getting this? Like that hour one time Chad goes, I think I heard about 10% of what he said there, and that 10% revolutionized the hour at the end of the fifth step for me. So my boys are thinking, oh, so Charlie's got a new sponsor. What's this going to be like, and what's he like, and what are we going to do? And when you get a new sponsor, what's the first thing you figure we're going to do? Right, but probably going to write inventory. That's the first thing a lot of us think of when you go to it is, I want to get back into work, I probably need to write inventory. Not a terrible idea, but Mark comes to the house one night, and it was the very beginning of the Common Solution meeting, and on Thursday nights, and we've been doing it for a long time at the table. But Mark sits down, and everybody's kind of like, let's see what's going to happen here. And I'll never forget it. Mark sits down and he goes, where are you men at with the amends process? And we said what an alcoholic says when they need to think of an answer. I went, what? and he said, where are you guys at with the amends process? And I said, well, and I tried to be at some answer, to make it sound like I was working a killer program. And he goes, I sense that there's a significant experience available for you guys in the amends process. And we were like, how does he know that? He just got here, and we thought he was like Svengali or something, some mind reader. But it turns out nearly all of us have a significant experience available in the bulk of the rooms, and when I say the bulk of the advice in the rooms of AA is geared towards not having to make the amends, that's the common experience in a lot of the rooms. And like Katie was saying, the most dramatic stories you hear from the podiums are amends that were made in relationships that were healed that could not have happened in the absence of a power greater than ourselves, and you see it over and over and over. You go, yeah, well, I choose not to involve myself in that process, and so one of the things that we did differently was he had us write it all down he had us make an amends list, and then he had us write it all down on cards. We used little 3x5 index cards. So I had my list, and at 17 years of sobriety, I came up with 42 amends on that list. Some of them were from before I got sober. Some of them were from in sobriety. Some of the most significant ones were from in sobriety. And I don't know what I'll get to talk to about, but I can tell you this. I didn't dread the financial ones. When you come up and plop $3,000 down on a guy's desk, you rarely get tossed out of their office. The amends that I dislike the most are the ones where I'm a butthole on the way in, and I feel like a butthole on the way out. The ones where you just can't really erase the slate. You can go and apologize and say, I'm just really sorry. Anyway, it's kind of tragic, and those, and it tells us how to address those, but some of them I don't always get where I have to be careful. Sometimes there's a thing in there where it says, but your man is sure to be impressed with the sincere desire to set right the wrong. And that's got to be present in every amends I make. Sometimes I got to ask myself, who am I making this amends for? Am I making this amends to set them free? Or am I trying to make this amends so I'll feel better? You ever make one to my sister, and then a little while you go, well, this is a true story. I went to my sister one time to try to make further amends, and she goes, why are we doing this? Well, you've already done this. And I'm like, I realized that I didn't feel that much better after doing it, because, I had stolen money out of her purse, and talk about convoluted values. For some reason, there was no ethical conflict in taking money out of my mother's purse. But when I took $15 out of my sister's purse, it was a real violation, and I felt terrible about it, but that came out in the process. But I'm going to get to the list. But on the cards, we write the nature of the amends, and then we put who it is, their contact information, what the harm was, and then we have 3 questions we put and that's why I wanted to talk about my sister, is one after I made the amends is I say, have I harmed you in any other way? So powerful, because part of living a life based on selfishness and self-centeredness is I have very little awareness of my effect on other people, right? Because I'm thinking about me, and you ever look up at somebody's angry or hurt and you're like, what? Well, that happens with monotonous regularity. And so when you say, have I harmed you in any other way, my sister would be a perfect example where I would have gone to my sister and made amends for stealing $15 out of her purse. Can you see her going, really? Really? So let me get this straight. You robbed all the emotional stability out of our house. You took all the energy from our parents. I'm doing everything right. You're getting all the attention because you're always in trouble and all that sort of thing. You stole my little brother from me. You robbed our parents, and you took away everything I hoped for in my little brother and our family. And you think you're going to come to me and give me $15 and we're going to be square? Kind of hoping, that's the power of this question, have I harmed you in any other way? And the second question is, do you want to tell me how this made you feel? And the third one is there anything I can do to help make this right? And after every question, I've written on my card, SUAL. You ask the question, and then you shut up and listen. And then you have I harmed you in any other way? Shut up and listen. And sometimes there's an intuitive chunk to this because you can't always, sometimes people will say, oh, okay, that's just water under the bridge, enough said, you're doing better now. And we don't want to make people uncomfortable. Sometimes you do kind of have to go, this was really important and it would be a real honor to me if we could actually dive a little deeper into this conversation. Katie did that with one where the guy told her that's just the way women are originally. And by the time she got him, could we actually have this conversation? The guy cried 3 times, during the amends, because there was a lot more there than that's just the way women are, I mean, I don't. We won't have time to talk about everything, so I hope it's okay that I threw that out there.
Yeah, well, that's all I want on tape.
Okay, so we started making this amends. I'll never stand up here and tell you I've made amends to everybody I've ever harmed. But I can tell you honestly that I've made amends to everybody that I'm aware of harming, and I started knocking off those cards. And I have one I was talking to Marguerite about, that there's one that won't accept an amends. And we like the line that says there may be some amends we can never fully make. I heard a guy quote that in a meeting one day because it says there's a lot of amends. I said, but what's the next line? And he didn't like that. And the next line says, we don't worry about them if we can honestly tell ourselves we'd make them if we could. Well, that changes things a little bit, because there are some that I'd just be dying to make, if I could. And when you get in this amends awareness, brace yourself, because they just start kind of popping up and, bloop, 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 here comes another one. You go, so that amends process, and one of the things in the book, there's a treatment center in Austin that sends people out to make amends, and they have this little card that says, I'm an alcoholic in search of a spiritual experience, and I'll never get over my drinking until I've cleaned up the past. That has never sat well with me. It seems selfish, and I could never figure out why it didn't sit right with me. It just didn't seem right. And one night at Primary Purpose Group, we were reading that paragraph on To the Man We Hate, and it says, it's talking about the man we hate. He might be wondering why we've come to see it. And to him, I say I'll never get over my drinking until I've done the utmost but to my mother, whose biggest fear is that I might drink again, that would be emotional blackmail to say, listen, Mom, I may never get over my drinking and, until I've made all these amends. And she's going to go, okay, 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 everything's fine. Don't worry about it. So it was Tim P. that pointed out that it was only into the man we hate that I use that line about I'll never get over my drinking until and so.
And sweep off our side of the street.
Yeah, disregarding the other person entirely. We're there to sweep off our side of the street. And sometimes when I say we got to have this sincere desire to set right the wrong, one of the times I can tell when it's not there is you ever go to amends to somebody, those ones where you've got, this is the situation, and there's my part. And here's their part, and that's why I'd like to get rid of the phrase I looked at my part, because first of all, the book never says that anywhere. Second of all, who says I'm qualified to discern the parts? But when I know that I'm not only there, that I'm not there just to with a sincere desire to set right the wrong, is sometimes when you go in and I go, okay, Tommy, I'm really sorry I did that thing about that deal, and then you go, and they go, well, I'm glad you finally saw that, and you're like, seriously? You got nothing for me? No. I thought me making amends for my teeny little piece was going to grease the wheels for you to come with your gigantic harm to me. And that's not the way the exercise goes. I want to talk about married life for a minute. I love being married to Katie. I want to stay married for the rest of my life to Katie. And I said that in our wedding vows. I said, every day in the rest of my life, I want to spend with you. And I meant it. So anything that's blocking that, some days I'm anxious to address, and other days I'm like, yeah, we'll talk about it. But there have been times, some of the tools we use, and some of this will come out the 10th step, and I want to just throw this out there, I'm a big fan of do-overs. Mulligans would be another. I'm a big fan of do-overs, and there's been plenty of times. It can be as simple as, one thing I learned is that when she gets her hair done, it's important to notice, right? They go spend 2 or 3 hours in the chair, and she'd come home and walk in the door, and I'm like, hey, what's up? And she's like, I got my hair, and there was one time, I swear to God, this is a true story. I said, oh, could I have a do-over? And she goes, yeah. And I go, okay, get back in your car. And so she goes out in the garage, sits down in her car, and I went over and I opened the door and I went, oh my God. Did you get your hair done? And she's like, yes, and I go, oh my God, it looks fantastic. Turn around. I mean, oh, it's just terrific. And as silly as it sounds, it can be helpful, and we've done do-overs over much more heated situations with that, where I've really stepped in it and gone, and it's a privilege to have a partner that will allow a do-over too, because at the most critical times, sometimes I'll go, could we do a do-over? I really, because fights that used to last a couple of days are down to 15 minutes now, and there's times where if we're at a shooting event or something where we're going to be there we have a lot of fun in this sport, and the last thing we want to do is go spend thousands of dollars and be surrounded by a bunch of our friends and ruin the whole weekend over something stupid that I said or did, something. So sometimes I'm just like, could we do a do-over on that, and we'll do it. Anything else on the list?
Well, do you want to talk about the part where you asked me, is there anything else? And
Oh, yeah, I'm going to do that.
I wasn't sure if you were going to talk about that.
Oh, we're nailing that. Another super powerful amends I made one time was to my oldest daughter. And there was something I had done that I always felt bad about, that I would have laid on my deathbed feeling like I wish it never happened. And I went to Sadie and I said, and it was funny because just like with April, that wasn't her top thing, and there was, she lived in Hawaii at the time, and she goes, one time when she was the cutest little girl ever, a little yellow-haired girl, and we stopped at Whole Foods. Whole Foods started on 9th Street, 9th and Lamar in Austin, in a little hippie health food store, and Sadie and I were leaving Whole Foods one time. We'd gotten smoothies, and she spilled her smoothie in the front seat of this convertible, and it was not my best spiritual day, and I tossed out the smoothie and didn't get her another one. And she said, that really, and that's what she brought up. I mean, that would have never made my list. And I said, well, Sadie, how about this? Well, how about if when we come to Hawaii, we go get a smoothie and talk about whatever stuff there is. And it gave her some time, and we sat there on the road to Hana and had a smoothie, and she gave me a painting she did one day, and it shows a man and a little girl, and there's a smoothie on the table, and it's hanging in our house. But a lot of healing took place in that conversation, and one time with Katie, getting back to this thing about have I harmed you in any other way, I made some amends to Katie, and then I said, honey, I am so self-centered that there's a very good chance that there's some things I've done to harm you that I'm not aware of. And if I'd like to give you some time, I know I kind of sprung this on you, I'd like to give you some time to make a list if you want to, and then we'll sit down and have another conversation about it. And she goes, okay, all right. And I go gooning along my way like I got good sense. And one day, and am I the only guy that brings up some of the dumbest stuff you've ever done where I go, remember that time? And she's like, oh yeah, I remember. I remember that one, and I brought up something like that one time, and she goes, I said, remember that time? And she goes, oh yeah, I remember that. She goes, that's on the list. I beg your pardon? And she said, that's on the list. I said, what list is that, honey? She goes, you told me that I could make a list, and I'm like, hold up. I meant like a couple of days, This was 7 months later, and that whole 7 months she'd been like, and every time I'd say something stupid or do something stupid, they go, I don't know she's got the list. Her sponsor doesn't know she's still making the list, and now the cat's out of the bag. So now we got to schedule a time to sit down. We sit down at the corner of the table, same table where we had the common solution, and I had a pad and a pencil paper, and she started going through her list, and I'm referring to the importance of that question, have I harmed you in any other way? Because we sat there at that table, and she read off 32 items that I had done to hurt her feelings, to embarrass her. One of the things I want to say before I get it is one of the things we believe in is if you offend in public, you have to amend in public. I can't embarrass her in front of 12 people and then apologize when we get to the house and feel like I've cleaned it up. I got to go to those people and say, I'm sorry I said that like that, and that sort of thing. If you offend in public, you have to amend in public. And that's Danny Brown. He loves to rhyme and stuff, But so we sat down at that table, and she had 32 items on her list. I mean, it was. But the thing about it was, every one of those were legitimate harms, and not one of them was on my amends list to her. And the thing I didn't realize in that exercise is that she said she had a Rolodex in her head. For the younger members, there used to be a thing we actually wrote on paper and with people's phone numbers, and you would turn it, and it was all these little cards, and some of them were this big, and so she said she had this little Rolodex in her head that every time something would happen, it wouldn't just trigger what we just did right now, it was like, and it's like, and that's like the time you said this, and it's like the time you did that, and it's like the time you called me that in front of them, and the thing that she reported later is that Rolodex went away as a result, and so now we're freer. And she's freer, and we're in a better relationship, and she actually kind of likes me, but my tendency would have been to avoid that process. Are you with me? Well, so not that long ago, now I just bugged the crap out of her anyway. I mean, it kind of tickles me. It tickles me most of the time, especially since we had that 20-year friendship as best friends. And that was a big transition because I didn't give a flip if I bothered her when she was like my kid sister. And when we got together, she'd say stuff like, you're starting to bother me. And I'd be like, oh, darling, I don't think I could live with myself if I thought I'd done something to bother you. She's like, now you're really bothering me. So there was a little transition from that whole pulling the pigtails thing doesn't work in a relationship too good. But not that long ago, she said, I think I need to make another list. And I was like, do it, and we sat down.
Last week?
Yeah, last week. And she read off another list, and it's a doozy. Some of this stuff is real chunks of business that I can take into my morning meditation as a piece of business to try to not do that. And I mean, it was stuff I'd done to stuff that I do all the time. Where I don't listen very well. And so I'd come home and she'd try to tell me something, and rather than listen and maybe. One time, I think she said it yesterday about asking those 3 questions. That was the funniest thing ever, was when she said that. And when she was talking about learning to be a listener, and we were up here at the Wilson House in Vermont one time, and Chris Schroeder, one of your local guys around here, had come up to hang out with us. And this woman had come up to Katie and said, "Can I talk to you during the break?" And she goes, "Yeah." So during the break, over on the piano bench, Katie is talking to this woman, and the lady's talking, and Katie's looking at her. And I go, Chris, come here. And then Chris goes over, and I go, "Watch Katie listen." And so we're sitting there, and Katie's going, like this. And I leaned over to Chris, and I go, "I don't know how to do that." And Chris leans over and goes, "I don't even know how to look like I'm doing that." And so what it turns out is that you talk, and then it reminds me of something about me, and it's, so I think I'm relating, so she talks about her score at the shooting thing, and I talk about my score at the she talks about the trouble she had with the target on Station 8, and I go, "Oh, well, I ran Station 8," and I don't go, "Which target was it you had trouble with?" Or what did that feel like? And so in that workshop, when she goes, "So you ask 3 questions, right? So now you ask, you listen to the answer, and then you ask 3 questions as a follow-up." And I think she told you yesterday, but I want to say it again. This guy ran up at the end of that segment. He had his notebook and his pen, and because we've been talking about it a lot and learning to be a listener and all that stuff, and he runs up and he goes, "What are the 3 questions?" And she's like, "Well, you dodo, it depends upon the conversation." But I think half the audience was sitting out there going, "What are the 3 questions?" But it's a real effort for me to go, what did that feel like? Who were you with? How long have you been planning? Anything other than, well, back to me, and so that was on the list, and then a lot of other stuff. But I'm like, man, I don't care if you make a list every 2 weeks. I want for us to be unblocked. I mean, anything that gets you liking me, I'm for it, and so that's really, I don't know whether that's ninth step or 10th step, but, this continuing to watch for you. The thing I want to close with, the two biggest lies an AA speaker tells are, one is, I'll be brief, and the other is, I'll finish with this, But, the tools that we learn in steps 4 through 9 are what we carry into steps 10 and 11, and so you remember after the third step, it says, stay close to him and perform his work well, and we can't stay close to him if we're blocked. So 4 through 9 is this golf swing effort of getting unblocked. We can't just do 4 and 5. It's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then once we're unblocked, we carry those tools into 10 and 11. And I don't care whether you call it, going back, but I do 10-step inventories, I do evening reviews, and then I do occasionally a 4-column inventory to see if something is really, really bothering me. And sometimes when you talk about continuing inventory, people think we're talking about going back and doing an inventory like the first one you did, where it's 17 pages. It's not like that. It might be 3 fears and 2 resentments. I got to tell you, there's more fear, but fear is, we got to be careful, because in some rooms they can make it sound like fear is the root of our problem, and fear is just a manifestation of self. It's still, the root thing is selfishness, self-centeredness. That we think is the root of our troubles. And when you start looking at that, there's just so much to work with, and so but actually doing a 10th step, there's freedom on the other side of that. And if I'm going to be free, the problem's got to be me. I can't spend all my time looking at what they did or you did or he did or she did. It's where did I set the ball rolling? And it's, you really need to develop some 10th step buddies, and we've talked about this, I've talked about this with a couple of people here this weekend, Danny is one of my go-to guys, and Mike Lorenz is amazing, and then Myers and Chad. I talked to Chad quite a bit, and gosh, I didn't even get to talk about spiritual consent or path of consideration. I know. Well, yeah. Chad came to me one day on this spiritual path of consideration one time, and he goes, can I offer you a consideration, Charlie? And I go, sure. And he goes, you seem like somebody that's starting to run the show again. And I'm like, the thing about that path of consideration is that we don't get to respond when somebody offers, because if I could have responded, it would have been like, well, thanks for your puny little, observation there, but when you get to go off and reflect on it, you go, you know what, dude, you're spot on. Spot on. Everybody's pissing me off, and that happens when I start running the show again. And it's a real luxury to have people in your life that will go there with you. To have 10-step buddies that aren't going to, like if I called to gripe about my sister and they start talking about here's how you deal with a difficult family member, or if I talk about my wife and they go, well, I couldn't put up with that either, or something, I'm a dead man. I got to have somebody that's taken me to where did you set the ball rolling? Where did you make decisions based on self that placed you in a position? Where are you delusional? Where, what's a different angle? I say I'm in the entirely different angle business. I'm always looking for a different angle from when the guy's talking to me that I can offer to him as a consideration, that sort of thing. Well, there's a lot of stuff in this stuff that is so helpful. Katie's going to take it from here on out. In my closing, I just want to say there are tools that we can use. One time, one of my guys, I've got another story before I can close it. One of my boys was talking, and he said, I had 19 years, and I started hanging out with Charlie and their guys, and I started doing AA on an advanced level. And I cringed a little bit when he said that, and he goes, then it turns out that advanced AA is really basic. you know? And it's like, what if we actually did the stuff that the book talks about? And one day at the table, I was just telling the boys, I go, you know, guys, I must be an awesome sponsor. And they're like, uh-oh. You know, where's this going? And I said, because I've got you guys to such a spiritual condition that none of you have experienced selfishness, dishonesty, or resentment and fear in the last 2 weeks. Or you're talking to somebody else about it in the 10th step. And they're like, yeah, we haven't been talking to anybody else. But I go, look how we like to think of ourselves as a little pocket of enthusiasm, as a little group of guys that are doing it right, that are doing the deal. And look how hard it is to get us to work a basic, fundamental AA program. Nothing, there's no AA 301. You know, it's like, you know, and then when it says, you know, saying to ourselves many times each day, thou wilt, how about once a day, thou wilt be. You know, constantly reminding ourselves we're no longer running the show. How about occasionally reminding ourselves we're no longer running the show? How much better would our lives be if we were actually doing this deal? Because what happens is we come to a workshop like this and we get fired up and we hear solution, and real alcoholics are drawn to real solution, and we hear stuff and we think, yeah, you know, I really should write that inventory, or I should make that amends. But what happens is I go home and I fall back into my life, and it's the kids, and it's the job, and it's the relationship, and it's my golf game, and whatever it is, and this stuff kind of falls to the wayside, and so the thing I can tell you, this is a program of action, and there's so much power available in this process. And what if the rest of your life could be the best of your life? What if, you know, regardless of how things are going right now, what if there's more freedom available and as a result of this process? But it happens when we get home and we get with somebody and we do the work out of this book and we really start plugging in, you know, like a really good AA member. And the thing about it is, and I was talking to a guy, you can't even imagine how your life will explode as a result of this. Because I started working with a guy one time, I had 31 years of sobriety. And he called me one day and he said, I picked up 2 more sponsees at the men's meeting this morning. And I said, really? And I said, let me ask him, I said, did you share a lot in meetings before we started working together? He goes, oh, every meeting. Every meeting I went to, I shared it. And I said, and were guys coming up and asking for your phone number? And he goes, oh, no, nobody wanted what I had, you know. But then you start talking solution, and people are actually coming up and going, could I get your phone number? Because when I say real alcoholics are drawn to real solution, there's people in that room. And when I'm sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, here's a little trick that I use, I'll share with you. You know how we say funny stuff and everybody starts cracking up laughing? That's when I go to work. That's the best time to look around and go, somebody in this room doesn't think a damn thing is funny. And that's the guy that you can go up to and go, how you doing, pal? You know, and if he says he's got a problem at work, you go, why don't we go sit down and, you know, knock out a little 4-column inventory? You know, and you can deliver some freedom. I mean, right then, people start coming up. And next thing you know, you got your sponsees have got their little sponsees, and you see and the whole meetings can change. You know, I love to hear that people are talking about the self piece and that sort of thing. It's a real honor to get to come be with you guys. We love Jimmy and Mary Beth, and it was especially fun getting to be here with our best friend Danny Brown up here this weekend, and get to see Chad and Julie and a lot of other of our friends. God doesn't bring a group of people like this together to just help you guys. Katie and I get a big charge out of a weekend like this, and it's just been a real honor to get to be with you, and thank you.